Hey everyone, welcome back to my art studio. My name is Albert Fisk. I'm an artist from Stockholm, Sweden. And in this video, I'm gonna take you through the whole process of me creating this little demon painting. Let's go. So to start this painting, I started like all my other paintings. I prepare my painting surface. This is simply a 3mm thick MDF board that I cut to size to fit the frame over there. And then I added a few coats of gesso on both sides. The back side, I always use less coats. I think it's 2 on this. And then the side I'm gonna paint on has a few more. I think it's maybe 5. Let's see if we can get a close-up on the grain here. Yeah, I use a roller to get a little bit of texture. So this is the little guy I'm going to paint. He's gonna be a furry demon of some sort, holding a little orb with this little peepee out. And there's gonna be an orb up here. And he has a black eye, black teeth, I think. He's gonna be white with a dark background. Here are the initial small sketches. This is something else, but all of these is where it started. Before I can start painting, I need to transfer this sketch over to the board. Actually, before I do that, I need to tone the board or paint the background. So I'm gonna do that with a dark blue, I think. Then I'm gonna transfer it, and then we can start painting. Actually, before we start with that, you should go and check out my Patreon page, which is patreon.com/albertfisk, where you can see the whole process of the painting that is behind this paper here. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe my YouTube channel. Apparently it helps to point that out in the video. And I want to say a big thank you to my Patreons, especially to Steven, Chris, and Dan. Okay, so for the background color, I decided to mix Mars Black, Ultramarine Blue, and Titanium White. And this gives me a bluish grayish color, and I think that's gonna go really well with the warm tone that's gonna be on the character. And once I'm happy with the mixture, I'll test it on the board, since acrylic paint dries darker than what you see in the mixture, so it's good to try it out before we apply it to the whole board. And as you see here, I'll do that in a few coats, and in between each coat I'll use a blow dryer to speed up the process. When I'm done with the background, it's time to transfer the drawing. So first I'll tape down the sketch to the top of the board, then I'll flip it over and cover the whole back with this white dry pastel. When that is done, I'll flip the paper back over and I'll tape down the other side to prevent the drawing from moving around. And to trace the lines, you can use whatever pen or pencil you have on hand, but I prefer to use a ballpoint pen because I like how it flows, and then it's easy to see on the drawing what lines you've already transferred. Once I transferred all the lines, I'll lift the paper on one side to check if I missed anything. Since dry pastel is easy to remove, I'll go over all the lines again, but this time with a white colored pencil. To clean up the board, I use a simple cotton rag to wipe off all the dry pastel dust. And as you can see, the colored pencil lines are still there, and you get a super clean drawing to work with. I make the eye with a circle tool using the marks I made earlier to determine the size. I wanted the ears to look very similar, so I'm going to use a technique I use a lot when doing anything symmetrical. First, I trace the ear onto a piece of tracing paper along with some guidelines to properly align it to the other side. Then I'll go over those lines with a white charcoal pencil, but you can also use dry pastel for this. After that, I flip the paper over and place it in the right spot, trace the lines on the back of the paper, and then I'll refine the lines with a white colored pencil. This is basically like an analog version of the mirror tool in any digital painting software, and I love using it since I really like adding symmetry in my work. Okay, so it's finally time to start painting, and first I'll focus on the ground using the same paint as for the background, but I'll add more white to it. To get the look of mist or dust, I apply the paint with a small round brush and then I'll smudge it out with an old dry filbert brush. Once I'm happy with the first layer, I'll just add more white to the paint mixture and repeat the whole process. To paint the shadow under the creature's feet, I'll use the same process as for the ground, but I'll start with the base background color and then I'll just add more black paint to it. And I'll do this in different layers to have more control over the darkness of the shadow. Splatters from a toothbrush is a simple way to add textures to your paintings. I do this quite often for backgrounds, skins, and other surfaces. When it's time to block in the base color for the creature, I usually start with the darkest tone first. And in this case, I will be painting over some areas of the arms with white fur, since it's easier to do it that way than to paint around them. Once the fur is done, the dark tone will shine through, making it easier to repaint the arms. During the blocking stage, I'll sometimes do a rough shading or texturing, and this is to give me a bit of a head start for the rendering phase. I also like to add a little bit of paint around certain objects like the mouth and the eye here, and that is because when I add fur on top of that, it sort of looks like there's skin behind it that's just poking through a little bit. It has a nice effect, I think. To make a color pop really well, you can first add a layer of white followed by your color of choice. This is also very useful if the paint is a bit transparent and you want it to be more opaque. So instead of adding a bunch of layers of yellow, for example, you can add one layer of white and then one layer of yellow on top of that. There's a bunch of different ways to paint fur, and I'm still experimenting a lot with this to get the right look that I'm after. Recently, I found that using an angle brush really helps with the fur texture. It's even better if the brush is a bit old, so the hairs give off a more uneven stroke. If I'm painting a white fur, like I'm doing on this painting, I will start with a darker base layer, and then I'll just mix a little bit of a brighter tone and do another layer of that. This can go on for sometimes 5 layers, sometimes 2. It's very different from each painting. And even if you paint over each layer quite a lot, it will still shine through a little bit, and that gives you more depth in the fur. It's also a good way to control what area should be brighter and what area should be darker. I try to angle the brush differently for each stroke to give the fur more texture. And I also try to follow the form of the subject, which helps the fur to look a bit more realistic. For this area on the ears, where the angled brush is too big, I'll just use a small filbert brush to paint the fur. You can use whatever brush you want to paint fur, it's just a matter of preference. For me it's the angled brush, but if I'm not using an angled brush, I'll use a filbert or a round brush. I often jump around a lot when painting, so at this point I was a little bit tired of the fur making, so I decided to start rendering out the mouth a little bit. I'm using, I think it's cadmium orange and cadmium red. No, it's probably red ochre here. And just mixing lighter tones and darker tones to push and pull the form. I changed my mind regarding the teeth, so here I'm just simply covering them up with some white paint. I think it's ivory white. I thought it was a good idea to do a little checkup on where the painting is at the moment. Also, I had a few issues with the camera and the light. There was a lot of glares up here. But I think it's better now. I set the camera to manual mode, so it should be a little bit nicer. Okay, so one thing that I've changed is the little peepee he had. I didn't like how it looked, so I decided to remove it. And you can barely see that it's been that anything has been there before. So I think that's a good decision. Also, I decided to make the teeth white. They're gonna be dirty white at the end, but yeah, I think the black didn't really work there. And then I also decided that this little ball that I had here, that was supposed to be like a glowing orb, is now going to be changed to something like this, like a little fetus of some sort. So this demon is sort of holding its fetus, or I don't know if it's a fetus, but it's some sort of little creature there. And I might still make it glowy, but I'm not sure. I was also thinking about maybe doing it like it's encased in a little bubble or an orb of something like that. Another thing that I want to change is this little part here of the eye. It had a little thing going down here, but I'm gonna remove that as well because it almost looked like a nose that was connected to the eye, and that just made it look strange. So I'm gonna cover it over and add the mustache instead that he's getting. And I think that's it for the update. I'll keep working on it, and some parts I will cut out, like most of the fur, because it's just the same process over and over again. But I'll try and add a little bit of progress for that as well. Alright, let's get back to painting. Like I mentioned, the fur is gonna be the same process over and over again, just a bunch of different layers. So you'll see me here adding like the final tone, I think it is, and then I will glaze it back into darker, more dirtier tones, but you'll see that later on. At this point, most of the base colors are done, so I'm gonna focus on the eye here a little bit and almost completely finish it. I'm gonna take it to about 90%, then later I'll come back to it and add a few small details. And what I'm doing is just adding lighter and darker tones to build out the form here for the eye socket, and then I'll go and focus on the little black eyeball. I find that adding a little bit of blue behind the highlight of the eye helps it to give off that reflection of the sky. Also, since the background and the surrounding is this Payne's gray kind of color, it also fits with having the reflection resemble that in the eyeball. Sometimes when you're painting a shadow, you have to sort of paint backwards, So first I paint the shadow here on top of the upper lip, and then later I'm gonna paint the fur or the mustache on top of that. Sadly, I lost a little bit of footage here while painting the teeth, so you will see them just be finished in the next shot. Now it's time for one of my favorite parts while painting fur, and that is the glazing stage. This is when the fur really comes to life, because if you look at fur in real life, on example a polar bear, it's never completely white. It's always dirty or have some miscolorations to it. The way I do it is that I put down a very thin layer of water first, and then I'll grab a dry brush with transparent burnt umber and glaze that on top of it. The water that I place down will grab onto the paint, and you get a very thin and smooth layer on top of your painting. One very important part of my creative process is to allow myself to make changes. In this case, it was just the teeth and the horn, but other times I've repainted and redesigned larger areas I've spent hours on. It always feels better in the end. So remember, kill your darlings. Another very important part of my creative process is storytelling. So up until I painted this moon, I didn't really know what this creature was. But once the moon was in place, it was clear to me that he was part moon, part unicorn, and part demon. Hence the name UNIMOON. Speaking of storytelling, this little creature who's hiding in UNIMOON's fur is called Fragile. They have a symbiotic relationship where UNIMOON protects and feeds Fragile. In return, he gets special powers such as night vision, longer life, speed, and very sharp teeth. And of course, they both also get a best friend for life. They are obviously night creatures, and their favorite food is human blood and toenails. So if you want to avoid getting your toes eaten while you sleep, you better put out a small plate of your own blood and toenail clippings outside your door during full moon. To paint Fragile, I started with a dark red tone and gradually added more orange to lighten up the color. And this is to push the form to make it more 3D, and I also added some white highlights to make him look glossy. I glazed the fur behind him and added more fur on top and around Fragile to make him look nestled in. Painting the arms is very straightforward. I start with a dark gray and then just mixing a lighter gray up until I want to add the final white highlight. I felt that the arms needed something a little extra, so I decided to give UNIMOON some golden bracelets. This also adds to the story about UNIMOON. Apparently, he likes to steal golden trinkets from humans. Again, I felt something was missing, this time on his feet, so I decided to give him some black claws to balance out the painting. It also makes it easier for him to climb up the side of your bed and eat your toes. is. That's the finished painting. I had a lot of fun working on this. It took me about 6 hours of painting time, plus the extra time for prepping the board and the frame as well. But yeah, pretty fast for being me. And I really enjoy the small golden jewelry I gave him and the teeth. Those were probably my favorite part. And of course the little guy hiding out in the fur there. This painting has already been sold to a guy in the States, so I'm gonna pack it up and ship it as soon as possible now. I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe learned a thing or two about painting. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.